Boldwood presents A Halloween Murder, written by Mary Grand and read by Karen Cass. To Felicity Fair Thompson, a wonderful author, filmmaker, and teacher. Thank you for your inspirational classes at the college and for opening up the world of writing to me. Mary. Kiss. Prologue. Halloween, 31st of October, 2017. I creep along the battlements of the castle. The moon is too bright tonight. It's nearly midnight. There's an icy chill, but adrenaline rushing through my veins keeps me warm. Ghosts whistle on the wind through the crenellations in the stone walls. Dark spirits party. It's Halloween. The veil between this world and the next is cobweb thin this evening. This ancient building has played many roles. It's been a place of defense, a prison, a summer residence for the rich. Tonight, it's a place of execution. And I am judge, jury, and executioner. Tonight, they must die. I smile at the thought of them gone, already excited at the prospect of a world without them. Finally, I'll be able to breathe, to live my life. I will be free. Chapter 1. Tuesday, 31st of October. Earlier that day. The counter of the village shop was festooned with Halloween goods, plastic skeletons, spiders, children's masks, and bags of sweets to hand out to trick-or-treaters. "Morning, Susan," said Tracy, the owner of the shop. Susan leant down and stroked Lottie, Tracy's little black spaniel. "Sorry, it's just me. Libs and Rocco are at home. They've had their walk up the downs, and I can't manage them with 2 bags of shopping." "You have a lot more in your basket than usual," said Tracy, noting the larger loaf of bread, the vegetables and fruit, the large pizza, and the packet of oven chips. "I've got my daughter Zoe staying for a few nights with her friend Leanne. Not that I expect them to be in much. I don't know if they'll need this or not. Is Zoe bringing Jamari?" "Sadly, no granddaughter this time. Zoe's wife Faye is taking Jamari to her other grandparents in Scotland. Zoe is coming on her own for a kind of reunion with 4 friends she was in a rock band with back in high school." "Gosh, they've kept in touch all these years," Tracy remarked. "Do they still play together?" "Oh, no, in fact, they hardly ever meet in person now. It's all online, usually their WhatsApp group. The idea was to come over for a retirement concert for their old music teacher on Saturday, but they decided to extend the stay and have a few days together first." "That sounds fun. They can go round some of their old haunts." "It's more exciting than that," said Susan. "As the concert is to be in Carisbrooke Castle, Maxine, one of the group, suggested they book the apartment there for a few nights beforehand." "But you said Zoe and a friend are staying with you." Susan smiled. Tracy always liked to have all the details. "Unfortunately, the apartment only accommodates 4, and so Zoe and Leanne agreed to sleep at my house, while the rest of the band, Nick, Annika, Maxine, will stay at the castle. I think Maxine's husband is joining them. Of course, Zoe and Leanne won't be with me much. They will want to spend most of their time up at the castle, particularly in the evenings, when it's locked up and all the staff and visitors have gone home." Tracy grimaced. "Rather them than me. I wouldn't go up there after dark. Everyone knows it's haunted, and of course it's Halloween. I'd not want to be up there." Susan smiled. "I don't think they seriously believe in that sort of thing. It's just a bit of fun. In fact, I'm joining them for one of the ghost walks this evening." Tracy shook her head. "I'd not be messing about with all that. There's plenty of people around here who've experienced the supernatural. We're the most haunted island in the world, you know. You take care, and tell your Zoe to watch herself." Susan nodded in a conciliatory way. "I'll pass on your warnings to Zoe, thank you." She pushed her basket towards Tracy, a hint that she was ready to pay. Tracy ignored it. Susan guessed there was something else on her mind. "Of course it's not just Zoe you'll be feeding," Tracy said, looking down at the basket. You have Robert staying over for the odd night now, don't you?" Susan groaned inwardly. She should have guessed that one of Tracy's web of informants, that is, her customers, would have noticed Robert's stays. Tracy was clearly keen for an update. Susan, though, was not prepared to give this. It wasn't going to be easy to deflect Tracy, but there was one subject she knew might just do it. "Have you heard any more about my new neighbours? First I thought people were coming in January, then the for sale board went back up. Anyway, I noticed it came down again last week, so I guess someone may be on their way?" Susan was relieved to see Tracy's eyes light up as she eagerly replied, "My niece's boyfriend at the estate agent's gave me the latest. It's the same man with his daughter who were going to buy in January. I don't know what the hold-ups were. Anyway, the exciting news is that they'll be coming one day this week, so at least we'll get to meet them." Her face clouded over. "I'm sorry, I was unable to find out any more details about them. Confidentiality or some such nonsense." Tracy clearly thought she'd failed in keeping up with this particular aspect of village news, but Susan endeavoured to reassure her. "That's fine. It's good to know I'll have new neighbours this week. Thank you. I'm sure we'll get to know all about them soon enough." "You're right." Tracy leaned forward, lowered her voice. "I did wonder if they'd pulled out because of what happened. I mean, it's less than a year since your neighbour was, well, there's no easy way to put it, murdered." Susan frowned. "I know it was horrific, but he didn't actually die in the house. I doubt the buyers even know what happened. No, it's a lovely home, and it will be great to have people living in there again." "I think you're right. It'll be good for you to have someone down that end of the close. Now, I meant to tell you, I took Lottie down to our new vet's to have her teeth checked. They were lovely with her, and they've done the place up really well. I like that they keep the dogs and cats waiting areas separate. I've heard good things about it as well. I've signed up my two as I heard the list was filling up." Susan noticed a queue was starting to build up behind her, and as intriguing as all this news was, she knew she needed to get home and sort out the house. She took out her purse and pulled out her credit card purposefully. "There are certainly a lot of changes going on. Now I really must be off." Reluctantly, Tracy began to ring up the items, but continued to chat as she did. "It's a shame you never went for the receptionist role at the vet's. You'd have fitted in well there." "I was tempted, but in the end I chickened out. It's not just making appointments, is it? I'd have to do some training. I was worried I wouldn't be up to it." "That's nonsense. I'll let you know if anything comes up again." Susan filled up the bags for life she'd brought with her, and finally left the shop. Bishopstone, Susan's village, was a quintessential English village with a pub, a church, a few shops, a hairdresser's, a new vet's practice, and thatched cottages sitting alongside their more recently built red brick neighbours. It all appeared tranquil and quite idyllic on a morning like this, but as Susan had discovered, a lot more goes on beneath the surface in a small community. The murder Tracy referred to had happened at the village church. Susan had only been living in the village for a few months at the time when she'd found herself embroiled in the investigation. Still, that was a year ago, and the village had moved on. The emptier streets this morning were due to it being the October half-term, the absence of pupils and their parents dropping them off at school. Susan was grateful for the lighter mornings, as the clocks had gone back over the weekend, and it was a beautiful, crisp autumn day. The sky was a light ice blue with white meandering clouds. Leaves, the colours of tiny flames, fell from the branches of the horse chestnut tree. Blackbirds pecked at the few remaining berries on the bushes. Susan made her way to her home, a cottage in a small close across the road from the shop. As she opened the front door, her own cocker spaniels, Rocco and Libs, ran to greet her, and she wove her way around them as she took her bags to the kitchen. For Susan, home was her refuge. For 40 years, she'd lived over the other side of the island, in the seaside town of Ventnor, with her husband Steve, where she raised their daughter Zoe and a number of foster children. However, her marriage had screeched to a halt a few years ago when her husband had unexpectedly announced that he was leaving, and she'd found herself, in her early 60s, living alone for the first time in her life. And so she had moved to Bishopstone, and this was her new home. Her own space, her own mess, where she now lived on ready meals, wearing the same old clothes and feeling more content than she had for years. Still, with guests arriving, in particular her well-organised and straight-talking daughter, she knew she needed to tidy the place up. Glancing around, Susan cringed as she took in the books and papers piled up. Even her sun hat and bag with beach towels were still stuffed in a corner. It had been a wonderful summer, with lots of visits from Zoe and granddaughter Jamari. Each time they came over, she would drive to Ryde and pick them up from an early catamaran. They would head to the beach to beat the midday sun, then home to cool off. Exhausted, still smelling of sun cream and clothes sticky from ice cream, she would drive them back to the pier and wave them off. It had been a shame to see so little of Zoe's wife Faye, but she'd needed to spend time with her own parents in Scotland as her dad had been unwell. Susan sighed. Standing around wasn't getting the house sorted. Right, kettle on. After she poured her coffee, she remembered she hadn't had breakfast and opened a packet of biscuits. She spent the morning basically moving piles of stuff around, most to her bedroom, and then made up the beds for Zoe and Leanne. Meanwhile, on the mainland, Maxine, a barrister and the band member who'd arranged the stay at the castle, had left Portsmouth Crown Court and was climbing the stone steps to her chambers. She pushed open the freshly painted door and entered the familiar, musty-smelling building. "Good morning?" asked the clerk. "Yes, thanks," she said, and quickly disappeared into her room. She loved returning to her familiar space, her spiritual home, its walls lined with heavy tomes and files. As she hung up her gown and removed the tabs from round her neck, Maxine began to slip out of her court persona. She stored the horsehair wig carefully, and, undoing her clipped-back hair, she shook her hair free. She was still wearing the rest of her work uniform, the neat suit, black shoes, white blouse. They could be worn by any professional woman, but the other items were special. When she put them on, she was no longer Maxine. She was respected, listened to. She represented the law, justice. On her desk stood a small miniature of the Roman goddess, Lady Justice, with scales and sword, a gift from her father on her graduation. He talked of his pride, and then, with quiet sadness, how much this day would have meant to her mother. Maxine discovered that talking about her mother, who had died only a few years before, hadn't ruined the day but rather completed it. It was an important lesson for future milestone events she would have to face without her mother. Maxine learned it was better to acknowledge the loss and shake hands with grief than spend these special occasions trying to push it away and treat it like the enemy. In her heart, Maxine knew that she was a survivor, a fighter. She was now deeply committed to her work as a criminal defense lawyer. She loved it. No two cases were the same. There were always new prosecution cases to unpick, to dismantle brick by brick. Her friends didn't understand how she could take on some of her clients. "How can you do it?" they'd say. "How can you defend someone who is accused of something terrible?" Each time she gave the same reply. Everyone deserves the best defense, the best version of their story to be told. One day, it could be you. She could see from the skeptical, smug looks that they were sure it would never be them. But then, earlier that year in February, one of her close friends from the band, steady, reliable Nick, had been arrested. Leanne had invited the old band members to a party to celebrate the 5th anniversary of her restaurant in Ventnor. To everyone's horror, Nick, after leaving the party early, had crashed his car, been arrested, and charged with drink driving. There had been no question of innocence. Nick was guilty. It would be an open and shut case heard by magistrates. Despite it being the kind of work she'd left behind years ago, Maxine had seen how frightened and desperate Nick was, and so agreed to represent him, really to be a friend to hold his hand. However, although it had felt the right thing to do at the time, in retrospect she was sure it would have been wiser to have kept out of it all. Normally she said goodbye to a client after the judgment, but with a friend, well, there was no walking away. Since the hearing, she'd had concerns about Nick as well as there being unforeseen repercussions throughout the group of friends. She scrolled through her phone and found the message she'd received that morning from Nick. "You are a saint, So looking forward to our week in the castle. See you later, Nick. Honestly, he needed to stop this. She was deeply uncomfortable with being seen as some kind of heroine. Maxine slumped into the ancient leather chair. When she'd booked this holiday for them all a year ago, she'd imagined sitting under the stars in the courtyard of Carisbrooke Castle, surrounded by the ancient stone walls, reminiscing about school and days in the band. Added to that, it would also be Halloween, perfect for ghost walks, followed by the concert in the Great Hall. What a week it would be! Maxine sighed. Who'd have imagined then what the year would hold for the group? Not only had there been Nick's arrest and court appearance, but she'd had problems with Leanne, and then the fallout from that visit to Annika's flat last week. Given the choice, she would call the whole holiday off. But that was impossible. No one had taken up her tentative suggestion they try to cancel, and she had a horrible feeling they were all in denial about what had changed between them. All desperate to pretend they were still as close as they had been back in their school days. Of course, there was one person on this holiday who had never been in the band, an outsider. Her husband, Gino. Maxine had been married to him for 2 years before the other members of the band had met him 8 months ago at Leanne's party in February. At least there had been some warmth and attraction left in their marriage then. Maxine had been proud introducing Gino to them all. She knew exactly the kind of man they'd expected her to marry, someone studious, dull. Nothing had prepared them for Gino. A charming, handsome Italian builder who'd swept Maxine off her feet on a holiday in Rome. Maxine picked up her phone, sent Gino a text. "I'm about to leave Chambers. Meet you at the flat?" The reply came quickly. "Sorry, can't make the 2 o'clock car ferry. I've made a separate booking to take the van over later. See you at the castle. G." The stab of pain took her breath away. She clutched her chest. Of course he was letting her down, again. She'd been in denial about Gino for months, ignoring the signs. It wasn't until last week she'd faced the truth of what was happening and finally acknowledged their marriage was over. He really had crossed the line, broken that one solemn promise he'd made when they got married. And yet, somehow she kept allowing herself to dream, pictured them travelling over to the island together, leaving the mainland and their problems behind. She'd even let herself imagine sharing all her memories of the castle, the setting for her childhood fantasies of dragons and princesses. And then once again she would feel his hand warmly squeeze hers, see his lips in that intimate smile that had captured her when they first met. Maxine shook her head, pushing the images away. That way was madness and pain. This week, if Gino actually turned up, she would tell him this was the end. Reluctantly, Maxine pushed herself out of the comfy armchair. She reached down to close the bottom desk drawer, and as she did so, she caught a glimpse of a postcard. For a moment, she allowed it to warm her. She touched it gently, then closed the drawer tight. Wrapping herself in her enormous white wool coat, she picked up her bags and left the room. As she headed to the door, the clerk called, "You're taking leave now?" Hearing a slice of disbelief in his voice, she turned. "Yes, I'm finally having a holiday." The clerk gave her a congratulatory smile. Both knew the fear a barrister felt about taking time off. What if that big lawsuit came in while they were away? What if they came back and their caseload had collapsed? Of course, Maxine was well established now, held in high regard, but all the same, walking away was hard. "My work phone will be on. We'll do our best to leave you be, off somewhere warm." She knew he was imagining her jetting off to some exotic Caribbean island and smiled. "The weather will be similar to here. I'm going over to the island, the Isle of Wight." "Oh, not far then. Don't you come from there?" "I do. I grew up in Ventnor. Do you know it?" He shook his head. "Only been to the island once, even though I've lived all my life in Portsmouth. Then we just got off the catamaran in Ryde, spent the day on the beach and came back. It was so odd. We felt we'd been to another country, and there it is, only across that stretch of water. We usually go to Spain. It feels familiar, like..." Maxine smiled. The idea that Spain was more like home than the island a few miles away might sound odd, but she'd heard plenty of other mainlanders say it. One even asked her if people on the island lived in normal houses, whether they used English money. You should go again, maybe in the summer. Take a car and drive to some of the secluded beaches. Some are empty even in August. Maybe. Maxine grinned. They both knew he would stick with Spain. Once out of chambers, Maxine drove to her flat in a beautiful Victorian terraced house in Southsea, looking over the Solent. She could even see the Isle of Wight from here, and she liked that. As she gathered her things together, Maxine found a copy of a CD of their band at a gig in the school hall. The quality was appalling, but it would be fun to listen to it together. She looked at the cover image. The Detention Seekers. She and Zoe, both guitar players, had started the band, their antidote to the Spice Girls, with earnest songs about women's rights and saving the environment. Leanne had joined purely to practice her drumming. The name of the band and the music may have been pretty ropey, but Maxine was still proud of the passion and motivation that had inspired them. The main thing that had saved the band, ensured them any stage time, had been persuading Nick and Annika to join them. Both were so musically gifted, Nick on keyboard, Annika their amazing vocalist. Maxine tucked the CD into the side of her bag. Maybe it would transport them back to a more innocent time. At the moment, the past seemed an infinitely safer, more appealing place to be. Chapter 2. Susan's daughter Zoe sat on the catamaran. It felt very strange to be travelling to the island without Faye and Jamari. Seeing them catching the plane to Edinburgh had been emotional. It had been a hard few months, with Faye's dad being so unwell, the early morning calls, Faye rushing up to Scotland at the weekends, and for most of the summer. The stress had taken its toll on them both. Although she was looking forward to spending her half-term on the island with old friends, away from her work as deputy head in a large primary school, she had offered to miss the reunion and stay home with Jamari. But Faye had insisted it was important for her father and Jamari to spend time together, and so they'd gone off together. Zoe sipped her coffee through the plastic lid and winced. Shit, she swore under her breath, feeling the searing hot liquid burn her tongue. Although Zoe had bought it before boarding, it was still boiling hot. Yet she daren't take the lid off and chance being covered in the contents. Instead, she pulled out the tiny tray in front of her, hoping the coffee would cool down before they reached the island. Zoe was determined to have a proper chat with her mother this week. Not wanting to worry her, she had avoided telling her how ill Faye's dad was, or the stress it was putting on their marriage. But there were other issues now, and it was time her mother knew. A text came through from Maxine, letting them know that she was just arriving at the castle, about to pick up the keys, and attaching a sketch map of the castle. If they arrived after 5, she said to phone her, and she would let down the drawbridge and allow them in. Zoe smiled. Maxine still organising them all. Zoe looked out of the window, the sea splashing against the side of the catamaran, and then a member of the crew announced they were approaching Ryde. She felt a shiver of excitement. She was coming home. Despite being urged to stay seated, people were standing up, jostling for position to get off the catamaran. Zoe joined the scrum. As she stepped out onto the island, she could see her mother, Susan, standing next to the car, waving. Susan was quite short, her hair a short brown curly mass, her blue-framed glasses no longer new. Zoe mentally rolled her eyes as she noticed her mum was still wearing the old parka coat that Zoe had worn to university. Then Zoe looked down at herself, also in jeans and an old waterproof. Granted, her own hair was blonde, cut in a very short, trendier style, and she had a few ear piercings, but she knew that she wasn't a million miles off being a younger version of her mother. Zoe waved to Susan. Even now, in her 30s, it was lovely to come home to the familiar, and she knew how lucky she was to have her mum, a wonderfully constant support in an unpredictable world. It had been amazing bringing Jamari over in the summer. However, Zoe was very aware that the seasons had moved on since she last came to the island. Today Waves noisily crashed on the shingle, and despite the earlier sun, the day was closing in quickly, the sea and sky an icy grey. There were no sundresses and t-shirts today, no wandering with a drink in hand. Everyone was wrapped up, walking purposefully. Summer had ended. As she approached, Zoe heard frantic barking from the car, and her mother opened the car for her to greet Rocco and Libs. As she was giving them lots of fuss, she looked up at Susan. "Can we call in at the bus station on the way to the castle? Leanne's car has broken down. She got the bus into Newport. I said we'd pick her up there." "Of course," replied Susan. "I'm looking forward to seeing her again. I've heard good things about her restaurant." The dogs had calmed down now, and after Zoe had given Susan a hug, they both got into the car. Zoe buckled her seatbelt. She automatically glanced down and checked her watch. "You're not late," said Susan. Zoe laughed. "I'm not looking at the time. I'm checking my steps." "You're still wearing that smartwatch. I thought you'd have given up on that by now." "Can't stop. I'm obsessed. I have to reach my target. I also track how well I've slept, keep an eye on my blood pressure, heart rate, the lot." "Wow, I'd hate to be constantly reminded of all that. So how many steps do you do each day?" "I aim for 10,000, which is harder than you'd think. See, for all my rushing around, I've only done 4,200. The struggle is real, Mum," said Zoe, grinning. "Good job we have the ghost walk this evening. Hopefully that will knock off a few more." Susan tutted. "You're like your dad. I bet he's got one now." Zoe had definitely inherited her love of running and fitness from her father. "But you've got to keep fit, Mum," Zoe said in her most teachery voice. "I might get you a smartwatch for Christmas." "Please don't," groaned Susan. "Anyway, I'm always out walking the dogs." "But it's not necessarily that many steps. You do a lot of watching them run around." Zoe saw her mother's grip tighten on the steering wheel and grinned. They were both stubborn and held strong opinions, but unlike in her teenage years, they seldom had serious disagreements now. As Zoe expected, Susan changed the subject. "Tell me, how is Jamari? Has that cold cleared up?" "Yes, she's having to go to nursery more at the moment, and she had a rotten tummy thing a few days ago. Never mind, she seemed much better yesterday. Hopefully, she won't throw up on the flight." As they drove slowly back down the pier in a queue of cars, they chatted about childhood illnesses, and then moved on to Zoe's work. "It's okay. Thank God I'm job sharing and only doing 3 days a week, with Faye being away so much. And, Zoe hesitated. "I could come over and help out more," offered Susan. Zoe looked out at the familiar streets, noticed they were passing the entrance to Quor Abbey, made a mental note to take Jamari to see the red squirrels in the ground soon. Aware Susan was waiting for an answer, she hesitated. She knew her mother would come to their aid in a heartbeat, but had been putting off asking her. More frequent visits would just add guilt to Faye's spiralling stress levels. There were also the possible changes she'd not told her mum about yet. If they happened, it was important her mother had a good support network of friends in her new home on the island. Forcing a smile, she turned to Susan. "That's kind, but no, we'll be fine." Zoe decided to move the conversation on and started to chat about the coming week. "It will be interesting to see how this week goes. It's quite intense to be spending so much time together. I realised when we were all at Leanne's celebration in February that, apart from Maxine, I hadn't physically met up with any of them for years." "I was very surprised when you told me about Nick's arrest." "I know. He's the last person I'd have expected to be drink driving. He ended up being given a 12-month driving ban, a fine, and, of course, a criminal record. He was allowed back teaching, though." "He was lucky." "He was. By the way, did I tell you Leanne's brother Wesley was also arrested that night?" "No, what happened to him?" "He was charged with possession of drugs. He wasn't sent away, but he also now has a criminal record." "I'm sorry to hear that," said Susan. "I'm afraid Leanne's family had a bad reputation over in Ventnor. I think her uncle is in prison over here for selling stolen goods. Still, well done, Leanne, for stepping out of their shadow and setting up her own business. I admire her." She's the only one in your group who didn't go to university. She's done really well for herself. I agree, it's great. Any news about Annika? You told me that she's with Nick now. Did that survive all the business of his arrest? It did. They're living together now. Annika has a new job over here as well. Not to do with music, though, which is a shame. I'm sure she was the only reason our band was ever booked. She had a remarkable voice, but I did feel her father was far too pushy. She was my pupil to start with, but even though she was only 6, he found her a really expensive teacher on the mainland. After that, it never stopped. Exams, competitions, it was never ending. I'm so glad you never pushed me. As a piano teacher, you could have. Susan laughed. I'd never have tried that. You were happy going through the first few grades with me, but you hated exams. I knew there was no point in making you take them. It would have taken all the joy out of music for you. I'm grateful. You taught me to read music, and that was great. I think our band was a bit of light relief for Annika, but she didn't tell her parents much about it. I don't think her father realised just how hard it is to make it in the world of classical music. Still, it sounds as if Annika has managed to take charge of her life. Did you say she's a nanny? She was, but like I said, she has a new job now. She's working for the health service on the island, taking blood. That's interesting. She never went into teaching then. No way. She always swore she'd never teach, and to be honest, I can't see her coping with it. They had arrived at the bus station. Leanne was easy to spot. Short-dyed white and pink hair, heavily made-up eyes which sparkled behind black cat-like glasses, and a black leather jacket. Zoe jumped out of the car, and Leanne ran towards her. "Zoe!" she shouted, and they hugged. Zoe stepped back, looked down at Leanne's feet. "I thought you'd shot up, but it's those trainers. The soles are so thick, how do you walk in them?" "It's called fashion, Zoe," said Leanne, laughing. She picked up 2 large carrier bags that sat beside her wheeled suitcase. "You've brought a lot of stuff." "Someone had to bring Halloween." At the car, Leanne jumped in the passenger seat next to Susan. "Thanks so much for this. My fecking car is packed up again." She looked back at Zoe, demoted to the back seat, and grinned. "Notice the toning down of the language? I've had to do that. Can't go effing and blinding in the restaurant. The customers don't like it." She turned back to Susan. "Good to see you after all these years. I'd swear that's Zoe's old coat you're wearing." "You're right." "You never did give a damn," she laughed. "Thanks for putting me up. I told Zoe I could go home to Ventnor each evening, but with the way things are with the car, this has saved me." "Anyway, I have a feeling if you went back to the restaurant each night, we'd never see you," said Zoe. "You're probably right. I've left people in charge. Only a phone call away, so fingers crossed." She turned to Susan again. "I hear Zoe's dad's buggered off. Sorry about that. He never seemed the sort. Solid, if you know what I mean." Susan changed the subject quickly. "I hear wonderful reports of your restaurant." "Thanks, yes, doing really well. Family have been great. Mum was working with me but hasn't been so well lately." "I'm sorry." "It's this business with my brother Wesley, you know, the drug conviction." Zoe mentioned it to me. "He wasn't sent to prison, thank God. I go in to visit my uncle over here in Parkhurst. The problems in there are a nightmare. This new drug Spice is creating havoc in all the prisons." "What's Spice?" asked Susan. "Is that the zombie drug they were talking about on TV? I thought they said it was like cannabis," asked Zoe. "It's much more potent and dangerous than that." "Sorry, maybe I'm being naive, but I can't see how the prisoners are getting hold of it. They must be checking visitors," asked Susan. "They do, but Spice is scentless, dissolved in liquid. They can spray it onto letters, even legal documents. The inmates usually smoke it then, but some have died using it. It's nasty. So, as I say, at least Wesley isn't being exposed to that, but the charges and court appearance have had a devastating effect on him." "I'm so sorry," said Susan. "It's awful. Wesley's lost his motivation to make anything of his life. Mum is so stressed by it all. It's the injustice of it that has got to everyone." "Injustice?" Susan queried. Leanne turned around to Zoe. "Haven't you told your mum the whole story?" she demanded. Zoe had forgotten just how direct Leanne could be and stammered in response, I've not told her everything. Leanne rolled her eyes and turned back to Susan. Well, what Zoe should have told you is that Nick is to blame for Wesley's arrest. Wesley had been out in the garden smoking with friends. Just before leaving the party, Nick, the scumbag, called the police, reporting people smoking weed. Wesley heard about it, panicked, checked his pockets, I'm guessing to get rid of any evidence, but then found a packet of cocaine. He was sure Nick had planted the coke on him. Nick had always had it in for him. Leanne turned, her red fingernails digging into the side of her seat, and glared at Zoe. That's the truth of it, and there's more. When Wesley then ran out to challenge Nick, he drove his car at him, and that is why he crashed. Nick fucking tried to kill my brother. Oh no, said Zoe, shocked. She'd not heard anything about this part of the story. He did. Wesley told the police, but of course they never believed him. They were always going to take Nick's side, even though he was off his face. Zoe caught her breath. She'd heard Wesley had accused Nick of the setup, but never taken it seriously. As to this business of Nick driving at Wesley, that seemed even more unbelievable. And yet Leanne seemed to be totally convinced, and so no wonder she was furious with Nick. Zoe couldn't help wondering why Leanne had come on a holiday when she would be spending the week with a man she clearly loathed. Zoe was relieved to hear her mother tactfully try to deflect Leanne. Wesley is lucky to have a sister who stands up for him. You're a good role model for him, Leanne. You've done so well with your restaurant. I keep hearing about it. You specialise in sustainable fish, is that right? We do, replied Leanne, her voice moderating. We're very proud of what we're doing over there. Zoe was amazed that within a beat, Leanne's anger had dissipated and been replaced with warmth and enthusiasm. But she reminded herself, Leanne had always been like this, living life on a roller coaster of emotion. Whatever the reason, it was good to be able to sit back and let her mother and Leanne chat on. They drove out of Newport and up Cedar Hill. As they approached the unique set of traffic lights, simply red or green with no amber, the castle came into view. Looking out of the window, Zoe could sense the thick stone walls peering down on them. Zoe had not been here since she was brought by her mother as a young child. The castle had been a fun visit. Ice creams, climbing the battlements, watching the donkeys in the well house. But this evening, the castle seemed far more imposing. She remembered that although partly in ruins, the walls and many of the interior buildings were intact. The past still breathed in its walls. Susan parked in front of the castle in a small area usually reserved for coaches. Zoe and Leanne just took what they needed for the evening at the castle, while Susan took Rocco and Libs out with the aim of taking them for a walk. Zoe noticed the main car park, heaving at peak times, was practically empty. The few remaining cars, she guessed, belonged to the staff waiting for the light to fade and to welcome guests for the last of their Halloween ghost walks. The staff were here at times when the visitors had left. Some must know the castle intimately. Did they commune with the ghosts, the spirits of the castle during those hours? Zoe shook her head. She was being fanciful. She'd never believed any of that stuff. However, she couldn't ignore the cold shiver of apprehension. Up until now, the idea of being here after dark, having the run of the castle, had seemed innocent and fun. That feeling was now coloured by... what was it? Yes, that was it. She felt a knot in her stomach, one of dread, fear, one of foreboding. Chapter 3. Susan was about to leave the others to go on her walk when Zoe grabbed her arm and directed her to the entrance. You have to come and have a nose inside before you go, Mum. I've let Maxine know we're on our way. We can go in through the shop. There was an outer set of enormous metal gates. They remained propped open at this time of day. Susan knew that later they would be firmly locked, impassable, and there was no other way anyone could get in or out of the castle. They entered the shop and ticket office, which was full of tempting preserves and chocolates, as well as medieval costumes, play swords, and books. A friendly member of staff welcomed them and pointed them to the shop exit, which opened onto the path leading to the magnificent stone gatehouse, the original entrance to the castle on the west side. Susan looked up in awe at the impressive drum towers either side of an archway that had been defending the castle for over 900 years. They walked through the archway and out into the stunning courtyard with the castle buildings, all of this protected by imposing high curtain walls. Susan noticed someone striding purposefully across the gravel towards them. "Maxine!" shouted Zoe. She ran towards her and they hugged. "I've brought Mum in to have a look around." Maxine looked over Zoe's shoulder and smiled at Susan. "Hiya, Susan. Great to see you again. It's been so long, but you haven't changed." Susan was pleased to see Maxine again. They'd always got on well, and she'd enjoyed the long chats they'd had in the kitchen when Maxine had been an earnest teenager putting the world to rights. Susan remembered her as a rebel with dyed pink hair, and how she had been the first friend to stand proud with Zoe when she first came out in the sixth form. Today, despite the conservative jeans and blonde hair falling neatly to her shoulders, Susan could see the same burning passion for fairness and justice in Maxine's eyes. Susan looked around at the buildings inside the castle, all so familiar from her visits over the years. To her right was the chapel, then the entrance to the privy garden, followed by the green lawn of the inner bailey, and then, face on, the entrance to the stable courtyard. To her left was the start of a steep flight of steps leading to the battlements. Alongside these were the ruins of Carey's mansion, followed by the Great Hall, now a museum, the Well House, and then the magnificent keep. A path ran through the centre of the castle grounds to a doorway in the opposite east wall, which led to the vast bowling green. "The apartment is in the stable courtyard," said Maxine, "over there, to the right." "Oh, do the donkeys sleep there overnight?" asked Susan. "No, they go to different stables, but they're still there at the moment." "They were always the highlight of our castle visits," said Zoe, glancing around. "We dashed in, went up the battlements, then went and listened to the donkey talk in the well house, and then raced around the bowling green." Maxine laughed. "I was the same. I actually read up about the castle before coming, and I'm seeing it through different eyes now." "The problem with castles is that their history is so confusing," said Zoe. She grinned at Susan. "You were always trying to teach us about this place. Let's see. First, the castle was a place for defence, then a prison for Charles I, and finally a summer residence for Queen Victoria's daughter." Susan grinned. "That is a very potted history, but yes, that's about right." She looked around. "These walls saw all that and so much more. I think that's quite magical." Maxine saw Susan's gaze move to the battlements. "Do you fancy going up before the light goes? Take in the views?" I'd quite like to, but I can't take the dogs up there," said Susan. "You go, Mum," said Zoe. "I'll look after Rocco and Libs." "Great. Do you want to come, Leanne?" Maxine asked. It was the first time the women had looked directly at each other. "I'll go with Zoe, take my bags to the accommodation," said Leanne. "Okay," said Maxine briskly. "Once you enter the stable courtyard, cross it and you'll find a short flight of steps that lead to the entrance to the apartment, behind the office and cafe buildings." "Brilliant, we'll see you there." "Right, Susan, let's start the climb." They walked to the base of the steps, where Susan glanced at the large notice warning them of danger ahead. She grabbed hold of the metal handrail. There were actually 3 uneven flights of stone steps leading to the battlements, worn away by ghostly footprints over hundreds of years. The first flight branched off to a walkway along the north side, which led behind the ruins of Carey's mansion, all that remained of what had once been a small but impressive Elizabethan manor house. Susan caught her breath here and prepared to ascend the second flight. At the top of these, another walkway branched again along the north side, leading to the keep. "The keep is closer than I remembered," said Maxine. "I love it in there, but let's continue going up today." There was one last short flight, and then they came out onto the battlements. The view may have been breathtaking, looking right over the island, the air incredibly fresh on her face, but Susan suddenly remembered just how scared she always felt up here. The nature of the top of a castle with its castellations meant that the dips, which may have at one time allowed soldiers to attack oncoming enemies, were alarming today. A memory of tightly holding a young Zoe's hand came back. In truth, Susan's main memory of being up here was one of anxiety and that huge relief when they descended the battlements all in one piece. Today, she tried to make herself relax and enjoy the experience. This was the north side of the castle, and so the view looked over to the town of Newport and beyond. Maxine held her face up to the sky, breathed in the fresh air. Gosh, that feels good. It's better air over here than in the city. Let's go this way and look down on the privy garden. Susan gingerly followed Maxine along this north side and turned onto the west side, over the gatehouse. As they approached the part looking down on the garden, Susan looked down on a ruined building tucked behind the chapel that she hadn't been aware of. What's down there? She asked Maxine. That's the old armoury. It looks a bit bleak from up here, but you can find the remains of an old fireplace, so it must have been quite cosy at one time. You get there up a short flight of steps on the way to the rooms of the gatehouse. I don't know if many people go in there. Anyway, come and see the garden. The walled garden was carefully structured, laid out like a Lego garden with a small equestrian statue, a small fountain, and neat pyramid trees. I like its old name of Privy Garden rather than Princess Beatrice Garden. It reflects what a special place it has been over time, a private place for people to escape to. My sister and I would play hide-and-seek down here. In my mind, I was a medieval princess, hiding from dragons and witches. You were a very imaginative child. I believed all the fairy tales then, all the happy endings. Susan heard the stroke of bitterness, which spoiled the innocent verbal painting Maxine had created. Suddenly, Maxine turned to her. I hope you don't mind me asking, but, well, how did you cope with your marriage falling apart? Susan blinked. I guess I went into survival mode. You start slowly to build a new life, but life's never quite the same. Can you imagine ever falling in love again? Susan thought of Robert. She bit her lip. The problem for me is that word falling. It involves trust, doesn't it? She turned to Maxine. Sorry, that's a bit heavy. Maxine held onto the wall. She bent her head, her whole body speaking of sadness and loss. Don't apologize. I understand just what you mean. I allowed myself to abandon all my usual caution when I met Gino. It was so romantic. Meeting in Rome, being swept off my feet. We were married within months. A fairy tale day of Italian sunshine and olive groves. Maxine curled her hair around her finger, then turned back to Susan. It sounds foolish, but I really did believe I'd married my soulmate. I gave him the gift of my trust. Her voice cracked. But it's not working, Susan. It's gone horribly wrong. Maxine held her fist to her chest. I'd not realized heartbreak was a real thing. In my work, I've seen so many messy relationships, but I'd never appreciated the hurt. The pain is frightening. It's deep in here like a shard of glass, digging in. Susan's heart went out to Maxine as she saw the pain and fear in her eyes. Maxine gave a weak, apologetic smile. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be burdening you with all this. It's coming home to the island. Seeing you takes me back to our long chats in your house over in Ventnor. Susan smiled. I always enjoyed them. And then she added more seriously, I'm sorry things are so difficult in your marriage. Have you thought maybe of counselling? Maxine gave a sad smile. I've given that advice to friends, and sometimes it works. But it wouldn't for us. You see, that trust I gave has been smashed to smithereens. There's no gluing that back together. That's awful, Maxine. I'm so sorry. Thank you, but don't worry about me. I'll get through this, I know I will. She looked around at the castle. Being here puts things in perspective. Me and my problems are a drop in the history of this place. We'll never even get a line in the history books. It's certainly a unique holiday home. Yes, I do hope we can all get something out of the week. The trouble is, it's not just Gino I have to worry about. I guess Zoe told you about Nick's court case. She said you acted for him. He was charged with drunk driving. That's right, but I wish I hadn't got involved. I'm sure Nick appreciated your support. He did, but it would have been better to stay out of it. It's not like a case I can walk away from. Anyway, you forget old friends change. I hadn't realized the implications of Leanne's brother Wesley being arrested that night. It makes it very complicated. Leanne told us in the car that she believed Nick had set Wesley up and driven the car at him. Maxine frowned. I'm afraid you only got her side of the story, and I'm guessing she's bound to stick up for her brother. She hasn't said much to me, but we've had other issues to resolve. I tell you, Susan, I'll be glad to just get through this week. Let's go round to the south wall, catch the views over the valley. Susan followed Maxine. Dark clouds were starting to appear, the light blue sky behind them now more white-grey. They stopped halfway along the south wall. From here, Susan looked southwest at the Bocum Valley. She could see for miles. Strategically, it was a brilliant position. Zoe said you'd moved. How are you finding it, all the way over here in the wilds of West Wight? Susan grinned. It's not that uncivilized. I had family living over here. Of course, I miss Ventnor. So many lovely memories of Zoe growing up there, and the foster children who were part of our family. But with Zoe's dad gone, I needed a new start. Also, the hills were killing me. Maxine laughed. Gosh, yes, I'm not sure I could manage the one I climbed to school each day now, but we did it without thinking back then. We used to love coming to your house after school. Chaos, but always cake in the tin. She looked again over the valley. It was lovely to think that Maxine looked back on those times with such fondness, and for her part, Susan had loved having them all round the house. For all the stress that went along with teenage years, they felt a more innocent time. She sighed and dragged herself back to the present. So, how are you finding life as a barrister? I can't imagine it's quite as glamorous as they make out on TV. Certainly not, particularly if you're a criminal defense barrister. Crazy hours, pay not what people expect, and the clientele is very mixed. Stressful. It is, but I love it. It's brilliant that there are talented people willing to take this work on. I believe everyone has the right to good representation, and I love fighting my corner. Maxine looked around, her voice softening. You'd understand. I remember you were always fighting for some cause. You had that photo of you at some peace camp when you were younger. Greenham Common, yes, I went there. We'd only just got married. Steve's parents didn't approve. My mum, of course, thought it was a fantastic idea. I'm glad I went. I'm still in touch with some of the women I met. You're an inspiration. Susan laughed, a very disorganized one. Turning inward to the castle grounds, they looked down on the courtyard and inner bailey and the old building that was now the toilet block. Apparently a little owl used to nest down there in the toilet block, said Maxine. And over at the Great Hall at dusk, we should see the bats coming out. Apparently, they have recorded 9 different kinds of bats here. That's why they keep lighting at night to a minimum, not to confuse them. Online, I saw a photo of this baby grey long-eared bat. They're quite rare and so cute. The ears really looked enormous on this tiny thing. I shall look out this evening. I got interested in bats a year or 2 ago and even came over here to the pub down in the village. There's a huge pond there where you can see, I think they're called Daubenton's bats, zooming low over the water, catching insects with their feet. It's incredible. You're a bat expert. Hardly, but I learned not to be scared of them. All that nonsense about them getting caught in your hair and being associated with witches and bad luck. It's been very harmful for their reputation. They're so important for the ecosystem. We should be protecting them. I agree, people generally now speak fondly of owls, but they were once seen as harbingers of death, which is crazy, said Maxine. Mind you, one myth says they carry your soul away when you die, which I think is rather lovely. As they approached the final eastern wall, they found themselves enclosed in the branches of overhanging trees. Talking of birds, said Maxine, look up there. Are they crows? No, they're jackdaws. See, quite a lot smaller. They nest in the holes in the walls and use the hair from the donkeys to line their nests. Apparently, if they leave the castle, it spells doom, like the ravens at the Tower of London or something. Let's hope they stay at least for our holiday. We could do without curses on top of everything else. You really have done your homework on this place. I can't believe how much I didn't know, particularly about the jackdaws. Charles I wrote about seeing them out of his window when he was a prisoner here. At least I know about him being here, said Susan, laughing. They had reached the top of another flight of steps. We go down here, be careful, warned Maxine as they clambered down. Susan held firmly onto the rails and made her way down. Once they'd reached the bottom, Maxine pointed to the entrance to the apartment. It's well tucked away, said Susan. I'd heard about the apartment, but never had any idea where it was. Maxine paused, glanced around. It's strange, isn't it? Hidden away. I thought I'd feel safe here, but there are so many dark corners. So many secrets. She shook herself. Sorry, come on, let's go and see the others. Chapter 4. On the doorstep of the apartment sat a large Halloween pumpkin, its toothy grin lit by a flickering candle. Leanne wasn't joking when she said she'd be decorating, said Maxine. The front door opened into a small hallway with a row of coat hooks and a shoe stand. Maxine pointed to her left. Down there are the 2 bedrooms and bathroom, and this way to the right takes us to the living and dining room. Come and see everyone. Susan followed her into a bright, surprisingly modern room. Most of the walls were painted grey, with one statement wall of floral wallpaper. There was a small dining table, sofa, comfy chairs, and TV. To one side, she saw a neat kitchen area. Leanne and Zoe were busy hanging a banner, while the people Susan recognised as Nick and Annika sat on the sofa and greeted her with a smile. They hadn't changed a lot, both conservatively dressed, in jeans and Fair Isle jumpers, Nick with short red hair, Annika with shoulder-length mousy brown hair and old-fashioned brown-rimmed glasses. "How was your walk, Mum?" asked Zoe. "Great, I've learned new things about the castle already." "I showed Susan where the owl nests and the bats roost," said Maxine. "Mum knows a thing or two about bats," said Zoe. "I told you about her solving a murder in her village. The victim was an expert on bats." Maxine turned to Susan. "I forgot you'd been involved in solving a crime. Very impressive, and surprising, really. I've always seen you as someone fighting the establishment." "But I fight for truth," said Susan. "Zoe is very proud of your achievements," said Maxine. "I noticed there was no mention of you in the papers." "The police weren't too impressed with my involvement," said Susan, "but I was proved right." "You should have become a lawyer." Susan laughed, and at that point Nick heaved himself off the sofa. "Hi, Susan. It's been years. How are you?" He didn't wait for her to answer, but turned to Zoe. "How's the teaching? How you cope with a family and being deputy head, I don't know. You must be knackered. I'll pour you a few extra drinks this week." "Thanks. How's the term going?" "Cut the budget again. Music has been slashed to the bone, and yet, come any event at the school, I'm meant to summon up a choir and an orchestra and put on a Christmas production with a drama department that is down to 1.5 teachers. Crazy." "Sounds like chaos." Zoe looked over at Annika, who was still sitting on the sofa. "Good to see you, Annika. How are you?" Annika stood up slowly and stood slightly behind Nick. Fine, thanks. It's awesome to be staying here. I've hardly been in the castle during the day, let alone night time. She sounded young, like a child on a school outing. How's it going taking blood then? Annika's official title is phlebotomist, said Nick with mock severity, and then, putting his arm around her shoulder, said, I'm very proud of her. She's done so well. Annika blushed and smiled. I'm a diurnal vampire, very Halloween. Seriously, though, I've only been doing it since the summer, and I love it. I'm based in the hospital, but I go to care homes as well. It's great, having a 9-to-5 job that's not too stressful. It gives me time to paint. For the first time, I'm able to concentrate on it. I always thought you'd be off singing in some fancy opera house by now, said Leanne. It's all a lot harder to get into than you imagine. Still, I'm singing sometimes now. Nick and I have actually started doing some gigs together. Only local pubs. And how are you finding cows, living among all those yachty types? It's dead cool, really friendly. Annika glanced over at Maxine. I love the flat. Gino has done an amazing job doing the place up. I hadn't realised you were in one of his properties, said Zoe. Yes, I'm very lucky, and of course, Nick has moved in now. Nick let out a noisy sneeze. Annika turned quickly. Do you need your inhaler? Turning to Zoe, she said, We think it's the stables. He has loads of allergies. He needs to get tested properly, identify exactly what he's allergic to, and then sort out the medication. He's done nothing but sneeze and blow his nose since we arrived. Nick gave a slightly embarrassed smile, took out a packet of sweets, and popped a few in his mouth. Annika worries too much over a few sneezes. I'm fine. Maxine interrupted. Now I have, as promised, bought new torches and have had them inscribed to mark our holiday. She rushed off back through the hallway in the direction of the bedrooms and soon returned with a box. They're all set up with batteries and working. It can be a memento of our holiday. She handed round the box for them each to pick a torch. Each had Band Holiday, Carisbrooke Castle 2017 inscribed on the side. I brought 8 to be on the safe side, so of course Susan must have one, and I'll leave the box with one for Gino and a spare on the table here. Susan thanked her and copied the others.